Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Nicola Kemp and I'm Editorial Director at Creativebrief. We're super grateful to you all for tuning into this discussion this morning on making human sense of data and thoughtful marketing in partnership with the wonderful Bloom and Wild. We face a truly unique moment in time, both as individuals and as businesses. And if we want to build back better, then putting kindness on the business agenda is crucial for progressive brands, which is why we're so happy to partner with Bloom and Wild on this event. We are super lucky because we've got a fabulous panel here with us today. But what I've done, so I don't take up the whole 30 minutes telling you how brilliant they are, we're going to put their LinkedIn details into the chat. So please do that. So we've got Charlotte Langley. She is Brand and Communications Director at Bloom and Wild. Morning, Charlotte.
Morning, nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Brilliant. And then we've got Dr Dimitrios Tsivrikos, who is a consumer and business psychologist at UCL. Hi, Dimitri.
Morning. Hello, how are you?
Thank you. And then last but not least, we've got Rachel Aldighieri, who is Managing Director at the DMA UK. Morning, Rachel.
Hi there. Morning, everyone.
So to kick off, it would really be great to get a view from you, Charlotte, really, about the thoughtful marketing movement and how it came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose it all started back in 2018 when the team was running a retro on Mother's Day, and our customer delight team actually shared that they'd had some customers email in and say, could you just take me out of your email over this time? And then I'd like to get your emails again afterwards. It's just that I find Mother's Day quite a painful time. And so the team kind of took that information and thought, well, I wonder actually if there are other people experiencing this who aren't coming forward and emailing us, and could we make this a lot easier for people to do themselves? And so that's really where the idea of opt-out came, and it was in 2019 then that we sent our first opt-out email, offering our customers the choice that if they didn't want to receive those Mother's Day emails, they could click a button. We would continue to email them other things, but they wouldn't hear about Mother's Day. And the response was absolutely massive. It was really not what we were expecting, and we had customers emailing us saying that this was amazing and they were so grateful. We had people sharing it on social. It was picked up in the press. It was even mentioned in a debate in Parliament about grief and how as a society we support people who are grieving. So we thought, goodness me, we've really hit on something here. And then from that point, we sort of actually started to see other brands do the same thing, which we thought was brilliant. And so that made us think last year, well, maybe there's even further that we can go. And if we actually create a movement that people can be part of, then we can build this kind of action even further. And so that's when we launched the Thoughtful Marketing Movement last year, and we've now got over 170 members. It's really great to see this becoming more and more kind of standard practice. And our role, we're here to help brands set this up. So if you're not sure how to do it, we have a hub with guides. You can email us and ask questions, and we're also trying to build out this thought leadership as well, so with events like this, which can share with people why it's important to do this stuff as well, and how to kind of pitch it to your business if there's a bit more reluctance. So that's the story so far.
Thank you so much. And just to add, if anyone has any specific questions that they want the panel to tackle, or any specific challenges that they're facing in implementing this kind of change in their business, definitely do put it into the chat. And Rachel, I'd love to bring you in here, because Charlotte's really kind of laid the foundations of how data can be used in just such an empathetic way. And I'd really love to get your view, because you have this unique overview of the industry as a whole. How should businesses be more sensitively and responsibly using data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess several years ago, the advent of GDPR was a bit of a game changer, in that people suddenly had to start thinking about customer more fully. And I think that's the baseline. So I don't want to dwell on the compliance side of data here. I think what's really important is that remains the baseline, but we go beyond that, and we really do put the customer at the heart of everything we're doing. So when you're asking a customer for data, it's really important that they know that you're asking for that data to serve them better. So it's all about them. And I think what comes with that is obviously transparency and clarity and that greater understanding of the customer. And what we've seen from numerous research reports that we run is trust is the single biggest reason someone will share their data with you. And obviously Dimitri's far better placed to talk about the complexity of building trust, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But, you know, trust is about being transparent and open and understanding, empathetic. All of these things are so important. And I think increasingly we're seeing industry more broadly wake up to the importance of taking that more ethical approach. And I guess we talk a lot about data as an asset, I think perhaps wrongly as an industry. And, you know, we run a campaign called The Value of Data. And within that, we talk about data as people. And I think that has to be the overriding kind of assumption that everyone should make. The minute you start referring to data as people, you humanize it, you make it something that you are going to use to create more empathy and a much more thoughtful approach that Charlotte's alluded to.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so interesting. You've kind of really put a great foundation of that shift from compliance to compassion, which is the perfect point to bring you in, Dimitri, because I'd really love to get your view on that human perspective and really the role for brands, and if you think brands have a role to play in creating psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both Charlotte and Rachel, mentioned some incredible stuff in terms of, a bespoke understanding of a consumer, that we know that, Mother's Day specifically can be a really, really challenging time for people. So what can we do to bespoke the ways that we control data, that we can actually engage with consumers, so we can make you feel great about who you are. Also, what I loved about what Rachel mentioned also is just that, so that level of safety and trust. We need to be trusted. Brands have a massive responsibility as to actually making sure that as consumers, we feel safe. And for me, both as a scientist, as someone also as an active consumer, the way that I engage with brands is no longer simply to buy my groceries, so to buy my flowers, or to buy what I actually need to do, but they serve me into expressing myself, communicate with others, and engaging with meaningful connections with both people and products at the same time. So I can't actually connect in a meaningful way if I don't trust, if I don't feel I'm being listened to, if I don't actually know that these people are actually going to use my choices, my sort of form of preference in a manner that will actually serve both myself as well as develop the service that I might actually want to receive. So indeed, a brand is at the epicenter. In particular now, I think if one thing we've actually learned through lockdown is the importance that actually brands have in our own lives to maintain some sense of clarity, a sense of service, and to be there in terms of support. And I think I really like that, the sort of, the last comment in terms of actually humanize data and humanize the way that we do data, because at the end of the day, we are of service. And I think that should be, on the motto of any brand ambassador that I've actually see, that whatever we do, we are of service, rather than actually development or very mechanical, mathematical terms that, of course, they are needed for the logistical components of handling data. But at the end of the day, anything that we do is to be of service. And that service can actually be both transparent. If it is transparent, then consumers most likely will be able to trust us and engage with us as brands and as products as a whole.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. And that kind of service element and that support element really builds on some of the points Charlotte was making at the beginning about just how positively consumers responded to your move for opt-outs. And I'm thinking, and I'm probably not alone here. I'm definitely more thin-skinned at the moment, sort of in this post-pandemic world, much more sensitive. And I just wondered, Charlotte, from your view, do you think consumers are looking for more compassion, for more sort of purpose-driven brands? And do you think that will lead to more thoughtful and empathetic marketing in this kind of post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting what you said about being thinner skinned, and actually I really noticed that in the run up to Mother's Day this year, because there's been a lot of loss, and I think it's easy to forget that, especially now that we're coming out of it and we're all focused on reopening, but actually there'll be a lot of people for whom the last year has been really traumatic. And I think even if it hasn't been, most of us, I think that the sheen has been taken off, right? So therefore, I don't want to see, it's no longer, I think, okay as a brand to serve people these very shiny, sunny images of life all the time, because that isn't what it's like. So, this Mother's Day, we actually ran some content on our social that was about opting in to supporting those people who needed to opt out, if that makes sense. It's a little bit complicated, but if for those people for whom it is a difficult time of year, we thought, well, actually, can we start a conversation with people who know much better than we do as to how we can best support each other? And for us to be having that conversation on our Instagram in the days running up to Mother's Day, it wasn't shiny images of people hugging their mums, but we had such a big response to it. We had really helpful tips from a therapist, from people who are struggling with fertility, people who had experienced losing their own mother. So and actually the response there from that community-based sort of support was really, really strong. So I think there is definitely an element coming out of the pandemic that we need to show the ups and downs of life, and we need to lean into those. And yeah, of course, as brands, you don't want to do that all the time, because people need light and they need uplifting from brands, and that's still something that they're going to expect from us. But I think we do need to just reflect people's lives a bit more honestly, and life isn't just happy and shiny all the time. I think you mentioned is it purpose-driven brands that have a place. I always think it's important to remember that, the reason that customers buy from brands is that they offer them a product or a service that they rate, right? So that is always going to be the most important thing. But something that Dimitri said is super interesting, is that brands offer people a way to express themselves. So I think there's really something in more people buying from brands that align with their values. And so for me, I think that's the more sort of pointy thing that we can make sure we're getting into, and you see that really clearly with sustainability, for example, and customers voting with their wallets to shop with brands who they think are doing a good job there. So I think I think values is really important, and the values of the business. And I suppose do I think post-pandemic that people will do more of it? I wonder if lots of brands will just think, right, okay, now we're all ready to go. We lots of people have had a difficult 2020, but what I would say, and so they'll be focused on the commercials, right? But what I would say is that this thoughtful marketing, we don't do it for the commercial gain, but interestingly, we are seeing that it does make commercial sense. And I think, I've already talked about the sort of brand love that's been created by offering people these kind of opt-outs, but we've also actually seen more granularly that the lifetime value of people who've opted out is significantly higher than those who haven't. And I offer that information not as an incentive, but as just kind of a reassurance that this isn't, if you choose to act in this way, it's not going to harm your commercials. And in fact, I think it's probably better for them. It's not why we do it, but there might be people out here listening to this thinking, I'm never going to be able to persuade my board to do this. So I offer that to you, and do chat to me some more if that's something that resonates for anyone listening.
I think that's such a powerful point as well. And sometimes I think when we talk about purpose at such a sort of high level, it feels like it's only for a small number of brands with a large amount of resource. But the power of values is something that's perhaps more accessible to a growing pool of brands. And Rachel, I'd love to bring you in here, because we've had some questions coming in as well, just in terms of, is the contact itself triggering that raises the event, asking you to opt out, which kind of raises a few questions around data as a whole. I mean, do you think that there is just more to be done in terms of demystifying data and just being a bit more transparent and thoughtful? And I know you've done a lot of work at the DMA around values. So where are we with that journey?
Yeah, well, I guess there was definitely more to be done. I think that's without a doubt. But what's encouraging is that's pretty much our core mission at the DMA is around a code that's putting the customer front and center of everything you're doing. We've got well over 1,000 organizations that signed up to that and practicing that on a daily basis. But I think, Charlotte's point around values is so important. When we started a campaign which was looking at the value of data and the worth it brought to business and industry more broadly, it became very clear early on, and this was working actually with the School of Creative Mathematics at Edinburgh Uni, that it wasn't the worth of the data itself as an asset, it was how you use that data. And more now we're exploring the value of values. So looking, and to Charlotte's point, actually looking at the business case that sits behind having that values driven approach in terms of driving the organizational behavior. So it's not just a kind of a shiny purpose that you add onto your marketing. It's something that's at the core of your business and how you operate, how you treat your customer. And actually, perhaps an even more important point is your teams. And there's obviously a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, but as that relates to data, it's so important that if you really want to have a thoughtful and authentic approach to looking after your customers, you need teams that look like your customers. You need inclusive and diverse teams. And that's something that, again, it's about bringing all these things together to drive a broader business case. And, as a trade association, we're really focused on that at the moment, is showcasing that business value. It isn't just a nice thing to do, it's the right thing to do in terms of business growth, and really building those customer connections that you talked about, Nicola.
Thank you. I think that's so interesting, and in terms of sort of thinking more about who's creating this work as well, what questions are being asked from a D&I lens is such an important part of this discussion. And Dimitri, with that in mind, I'd love to bring you in here because, Charlotte and Rachel have both really made the business case for making these changes to how you use data. But from a consumer perspective, particularly in the marketing industry, we have this quite like binary, spiky debate that's like, oh, purpose, it's all overblown. It's quite kind of either or. So I'd love to get your view on if you think people, as we come out of this pandemic, they do want a more truthful, a more empathetic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. I do believe that there is a commercial benefit to having a purpose, because a purpose allows people to understand your values, your clarity, and what that brand is all about. But I think stereotypically that purpose for a lot of brands has been quite stale, and it hasn't been flexible enough. And I think it's all about growth, which is at the very epicenter of why consumers buy things. So you buy things to develop, to express yourself. It's always that sort of, positivity component that we want to grow as people, as a community, as a family. At the time that we're experiencing, we're experiencing a collective shock. You're traumatized. The economy has stopped for a year and a half. Money is scarce, your health has actually been sabotaged by an incredibly serious virus. This is not the time for us to push growth to them. You can grow, things have changed. So we need to reevaluate purpose, we need to actually understand purpose. And what consumers actually need at this stage is healing. So healing perhaps may be one of those components that we might need to think about being a part of our purpose, of actually how we can actually help them. And I think what you've actually mentioned at times, people go, well, purpose, big fluffy words, nobody really understands it. Do really consumers care about that? They do. And I think one of the key tips that I actually give to both, brands that I work with as well as professionals in the marketing sector is empathy. And you mentioned that word because this is incredibly important, because people understand purpose by the way that you do things. And in psychology, we actually have 3 layers of empathy that I don't see enough professionals actually exercising. And if you don't mind, just to give that insight into them, it says that empathy comes in 3 forms when it comes to consumer behavior and when it comes to communication. To start with is the cognitive empathy, just simply understanding what's happening. So you might have a frustrated consumer or someone who's being asked a question about data. Do they understand why we collect that data or why we're being empathetic? So we're being empathetic about a situation, cognitively understanding what might be happening. The second element of purpose and empathy and also understanding data is also to explore their emotional state, which we call emotional empathy. Why they might be feeling frustrated or excited or sad, what that actually means to us and how we can cater our services as well as our products to evaluate that. And the third component is compassionate empathy. What do we do about it? So from knowing, cognitive empathy, knowing what happens, to emotional empathy, understanding the emotions and what causes it. And at the very end, the most important thing is compassionate empathy. What do we do about it? From the service to the data to how we actually communicate with that. And I think what I loved about this campaign is actually what it shows as an example that as this brand understood that we understand that Mother's Day is actually quite interesting. We've explored this, we've done our study, we've actually introduced a new medium of a platform to understand what emotions actually cause. It was discomfort, it was awkwardness, it was also sadness to actually bring up a topic that perhaps can be quite important. And what the solution was, you have an option, a very simple option of actually opting out for that period if that's emotionally tense for you. So I find this as a great case study of this component of actually cognition, understanding, emotion, and action. And I think as brands, for the time being, we've been incredibly good at understanding. We have a lot of data to understand where we are, but we need both empathy in terms of compassion as well as emotionality. And then when that full circle is complete, then I think we're a lot closer to being of service to people, and people will understand why we collect data, so actually improve their lives and help them at this stage heal.
That's such a good point. And we've had some really interesting comments coming in as well, that actually, making the point that sort of compassionate approach and purpose, it actually really understands your employees understand the values of the company. And I think that's such a powerful point, like as we emerge from the pandemic and what the toll that's taken on employees. And Charlotte, we're getting quite a few kind of really sort of technical questions around kind of how you implement thoughtful marketing, timeframes, acknowledging sensitivity, if you should give gifts or tokens around this time. Could you give us a bit of practical insight?
Of course, yeah. So look, I think we normally do our opt-out emails, I think about 6 weeks in advance, 4 to 6 weeks in advance. And I'm seeing comments, which is something I am very alive to, which is, well, if all brands start doing this and everybody gets an email saying, do you want to opt out? Whilst it's imperfect, I still think it's better than the alternative, which is they then spend a month being bombarded by every brand about Mother's Day or Father's Day or Valentine's Day, or whatever it is that they don't want to hear about. So it is imperfect. I think Rachel and I have talked before about actually, is there a wider solution? I'll maybe let Rachel talk about where that might go in the future. So it is a little bit imperfect in terms of, but it's still really valued. So we never have had an email saying, I wish you wouldn't send these emails. We still get an influx of thanks every year when we send these. So I think don't be too nervous about that, because it is better than the alternative. I also think that in terms of, there was the question on gifts, is that right? What should you thank people? I don't think people want a gift. They just want the option. I think that we can go overboard on this stuff, and actually what we're saying is, we know this is painful for you, click a button, you can opt out, and that's it. I don't think they want to hear anything more. So somebody said, do you then email and say that's it, you're opted out? No, we don't. We have a preference center, and I really encourage people to do that, because then people can do this at any time of year, and then if they've done that throughout the year, they won't then get the opt-out email because they've already opted out. And somebody asked, I think, do we only unsubscribe them for a year or two? We keep them forever. So if somebody's opted out once of Mother's Day, they don't need to do that again, or Valentine's Day, whatever it might be. I'm trying to, have I covered all of them? I'm just trying to scan the...
And just one more thing, which I think is quite a practical one. So how do you decide as a brand which occasions to apply this to, and this kind of treatment, and not to?
So we apply it to Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Those are the ones that we've kind of heard from our customers are the times of year that they don't want to necessarily hear about. You could, I suppose, look at other times of year, potentially like around festivals, that religious festivals that might not be applicable. We haven't done that at the moment because we're not seeing that that's a sort of painful thing for people to experience, but certainly these big calendar occasions that involve relationships and like specific relationships seem to be the ones which are more problematic, and which people are very grateful to have the option not to hear from us on.
Thank you. And Rachel, it would be great to get your view in here, both on if there is an industry-wide, so somebody's suggested the idea of a preference service across the industry. The logistics of that are already kind of, just as a concept, obviously very high. Do you think that that's something, in terms of a preference centre, something that we're moving towards?
Well, already the DMA runs several preference services. So obviously one's more specific to channels around the telephone preference service, mailing preference service, but we also actually run a preference service called the baby mailing preference service. And that's for people that have sadly lost babies, through miscarriage, etc. So, they sign up to that to ensure they don't receive marketing that would be, hugely upsetting for them. So, actually there's almost a similar premise around that sensitivity and the sensitive occasions that potentially could apply. So Charlotte's mentioned it's something, we've talked about, and as we start to see this grow, actually there may be something, we have the infrastructure, logistically we know how to run these things. So no, it's quite possible actually.
That's really, really good to hear. And then we've also had a point which really draws on the conversation we were having earlier around purpose, and this whole idea that marketers should just get back to the business of selling, which is interesting, looking at the kind of impact of unemployment. Will advertising rediscover its commercial purpose? Or will an out-of-touch industry double down on social purpose and drift further to the margins of British life? I think this is a really interesting point, because to the point that you made earlier, Charlotte, perhaps the cost of not doing anything and not having values is actually higher to a business perspective. I really loved that insight that you shared with us about the value, the long-term value of those customers being higher, because there is this kind of narrative that this kind of thoughtfulness, these kind of opt-out services are kind of a distraction from the business of selling. Could you share some thoughts on that, please?
Look, I think it's important to say that day in, day out, we sell people a lot of flowers, right? But this is another thing that we do. It's not all that we do. It's not all that we're about, but we are a values-driven company, and those values actually feed into the way that the product that people receive. So care is one of our values. So if we didn't do this, then our brand wouldn't be coherent. So I think strong brands, we all know that there is a commercial value to having a strong brand. The way that you build that strong brand is going to differ based on what you sell, what industry you're in, and all of that kind of thing. But I suppose what I would say is, this isn't your 24/7 all day, every day. It's an element of what you do. And I think you do need to find out a way that, you can keep people with you. And no, that might not be, a huge campaign around the, charity campaign or something. That might not be right for you, but there'll be other smaller ways that people will just take note of, I think. And I think it just lodges that connection in their brain. We're always talking about salience as marketers. Well, these small actions just, I think, tick up that salience and really make you sticky with people. So I do think there's value in it, but I do completely recognize that, this isn't our bread and butter day to day, but for us, it's a really important thing that runs through what we do.
That's really good to hear, and thank you so much for sharing. And we've had a lot of practical questions, and we're running out of time. So I really was hoping, Charlotte, that you could just let the audience know how to sign up and support the thoughtful marketing movement. I know we're going to put the link in the chat as well, because I know that lots of businesses are at very different stages in this journey. So how can they get involved?
Yes, so you can go to our website, bloomandwild.com/thoughtful-marketing, and there's a hub there. It's got more information, guides on how to set this up, and you can also sign up there and commit to offering opt-outs. And if you have any more questions or problems, you can email thoughtfulmarketing@bloomandwild.com, and we will do our best to help you.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you, Rachel and Dimitri, and thank you to everyone who took the time out this morning to tune in and ask so many interesting questions and make so many interesting points. We do hope that you do sign up to join the Thoughtful Marketing movement and take this moment to kind of build back better in a really empathetic and progressive way. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of day. Thank you.